In our headlines at this hour, President Yoon is placing priority on economic stability to protect the livelihoods of people amid a host of external risk factors. Seoul's finance ministry says prospects on the local export front are looking quite bleak amid China's zero-COVID strategy and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Just one day after confirming its first COVID-19 outbreak, North Korea says tens of thousands of people have been isolated and treated for fever since late April. Hello and welcome. You're watching the Daily Report. It's Friday afternoon, May 13th, here in capital Seoul. President Yoon addressed the country's economic and financial challenges with relevant authorities at the Korea Center for International Finance here in Seoul earlier on this Friday. Now, Finance Minister Jong-un and Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong were also in attendance. The meeting reportedly explored preemptive measures to protect the livelihoods of people here amid the host of external risk factors. Meanwhile, the presidential office, for its part, made note of the fact that this meeting was Yoon's first official agenda outside of his office as president, highlighting his dedication to ensuring economic stability. Staying with the local economy, prospects on the export front appear to be looking quite dull in light of geopolitical risk factors, including China's stringent pandemic strategy. Our Kim Hyun-sung reports.
South Korea's economic risks grow as China drags out its COVID-19 lockdowns. The finance ministry's monthly assessment of the South Korean economy arrived on Friday, and it casts a dim outlook on South Korean exports. With supply chains disrupted by China's zero-COVID policies and the conflict in Ukraine, South Korean exports may dampen later in the year. This forecast marks a stark contrast from the ministry's assessment last month, which had predicted a positive streak for exports. It also marks the finance ministry's first negative export forecast in almost 2 years. Exports in April showed an on-year increase of 12.6%. Despite the double-digit increase, it does mark a decline from February and March's growth, which both reported on-year rises of nearly 20%. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is also piling on inflationary pressure. Consumer prices in April rose a sharp 4.8% from the year before, marking a 0.7 percentage point rise from March. Soaring oil prices driven up by conflict overseas is seen as one of the main culprits behind the price rise. Employment figures in April showed improvement, however. The number of people employed jumped by more than 30,000 in a month, with close to 28.1 million total in April. That's an on-year increase of 865,000. Unemployment also dropped 1 percentage point to 3%. Consumer sentiment has also improved, with the index ticking up 0.6 points from the month before to 103.8 in April. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
South Korea's import prices, meanwhile, edged down for the first time in 4 months in April. The Bank of Korea says the overall import price index stood at 147.9. This marks a drop of 0.9% from March after 3 straight months of gains. However, it's still quite high compared to a year earlier, as import prices are up more than 35%. The central bank is linking this latest decline to the Dubai crude, which fell over 7% on month to an average of around $103 a barrel. Meanwhile, export prices in April rose for the 4th straight month, up 1% from March, led by diesel and machineries. The new administration's extra budget proposal largely seeks to support those who have borne the brutal brunt of pandemic-related restrictions. Our Ji-young explains.
One of the most important promises of President Yoon providing relief to small businesses hit by the pandemic is the centerpiece of the extra budget. Finance Minister Kyung-ho on Thursday announced the details of the second supplementary budget of the year, worth a record $46 billion. $28 billion of the budget as a whole will be spent directly by the central government, while the other $18 billion will be handed over to regional governments.
Of the roughly 36.4 trillion won, more than 70% of it will go to help small businesses hit by the pandemic, covering all of their losses.
He said each business that's had a drop in revenue because of social distancing will get up to 10 million won, or roughly $7,800. He added that the government plans to improve the compensation scheme so that losses can be fully covered. Around $2 billion will be used to provide loans and debt relief to small business owners and help them get back on their feet. Another big slice of around $4.7 billion will also be spent on strengthening preventive measures against COVID-19 and other diseases. This will include medical expenses and additional supplies of COVID-19 pills. Also, the government will allocate $2.4 billion for stabilizing consumer prices and people's livelihoods. Up to $7,800 will be given to some 2.2 million low-income households to support their purchasing power. Chu emphasized that the main source of the funds will be tax surpluses rather than debt. He said around $16.5 billion had been drawn from the expected tax surplus this year, and $11.4 billion is from other surplus resources and adjustments to government spending.
Financing the extra budget without issuing government bonds will minimize the impact on the economy, including interest rates and prices. The debt-to-GDP ratio is expected to improve to 49.6% from 50.1%.
He added that this year's surplus tax is expected to amount to some $41 billion, resulting mostly from a $23 billion rise in corporate tax revenue led by last year's earnings surprise in the semiconductor and finance sectors. The government is to use around $7 billion of the supplementary budget to reduce the government's debt. 엄지영, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol made his diplomatic debut on the global stage Thursday by partaking in the second virtual COVID-19 summit, during which he pledged additional funds to support the global fight against the pandemic. Our Kim Hyo-sun has more.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol pledged more support for the international community to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. The pledge was made in a pre-recorded video message addressing the second global COVID-19 summit held virtually on Thursday.
액트 A에 3억 불의 재원을 추가로 기여할 것입니다. 시급히 백신이 필요한 국가들에게 충분한 공급과 안전하고 빠른 접종을 지원하겠습니다.
The additional support comes on top of the $210 million of cash and goods provided by Seoul to the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, or ACT A, an initiative launched by the WHO and global partners to provide COVID-19 vaccines, treatment, and test kits. Yoon further emphasized that South Korea will continue to fulfill its responsibility and role within the international community and support its efforts to end the pandemic. Underscoring the fact that no one country can end the pandemic alone, he also endorsed the establishment of a financial intermediary fund so that the global community can swiftly mobilize financial resources to effectively tackle health crises going forward. Attending the summit, U.S. President Joe Biden appealed to world leaders for a renewed international commitment to fighting COVID-19. He called on the U.S. Congress to provide additional funds so that Washington can contribute more to the global COVID-19 response.
Today, I'm announcing the United States will share critical COVID-19 technologies through the World Health Organization COVID-19 Technology Access Pool. We're making available health technologies that are owned by the United States government, including stabilized spike protein that is used in many COVID-19 vaccines.
The White House explained that the summit has gathered over $3 billion in new funding to fight the pandemic, including over $2 billion in immediate response, as well as more than $960 million in commitments to the World Bank Pandemic Preparedness Fund. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, inbound travelers to Korea are poised to see simpler that is, entry protocols. The change comes in light of the steady decline in the daily COVID-19 case counts here. Our Choi Min-jung has details.
South Korea has rolled out a series of updates to its COVID-19 prevention measures. Starting May 23rd, inbound travelers to South Korea will be allowed to submit rapid antigen test results to verify that they have not contracted COVID-19. This will allow more convenient testing for people at a more affordable price. Currently, a PCR test result must be provided prior to entering the country. Authorities are also reducing the number of required tests from the current 3 to 2 starting June 1st. Children aged 12 and under arriving with a fully vaccinated parent or guardian will be exempt from taking COVID tests. Until then, only children aged 6 and under can freely enter the country without getting tested. In line with the increasing demand for overseas travel, the government announced that it will expand the number of international flights by 230 a week in June. This means more than 700 overseas flights will be available per week starting next month. On the treatment front, authorities have secured an additional 1 million courses of oral COVID-19 drugs. They also revealed plans to expand eligible recipients by lowering the age bracket. Currently, only those aged 60 and above and people with underlying health conditions above 40 can receive COVID-19 pills. However, authorities are planning to allow people aged 12 and above with underlying diseases to also receive oral treatment. These efforts come as South Korea continues to see a decline in the number of new infections. The country on Friday reported over 32,400 new cases, down by more than 3,400 from the previous day. The single-day average for this week declined by more than 12% compared to the week before. The number of severely ill patients remained in the 300s for the fourth straight day, and deaths below 100 per day for the past 2 weeks. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
North Korea is reporting a frightening pace of COVID-19 infections in its capital region just one day after confirming its first outbreak, and its leader is finding fault with the country's prevention system. Here's our Unification Ministry correspondent, Han Sung-woo.
Just a day after the regime officially confirmed its first outbreak of COVID-19, North Korea has revealed it's facing a threatening surge in infections that has resulted in 6 virus-related deaths. It's prompted leader Kim Jong-un to lock down the whole country and heavily criticize gaps in his regime's antivirus measures during an inspection of the North's National Quarantine Emergency Command Center on Thursday, where he not only called for the isolation of the ill, but also the adoption of scientific methods of treatment and the mobilization of medical supplies. State media on Friday reported that Kim was briefed on site regarding over 350,000 North Koreans that have fallen ill from a fever with an unknown cause since late April, of which around 160,000 have fully recovered. Over 18,000 people reportedly tested positive with the virus across the north on Thursday alone. And among those who have died was one infected with the BA.2 subvariant, also known as stealth Omicron. This comes after Kim Jong-un chaired a Workers' Party meeting on Thursday to discuss the regime's response to the maximum national emergency, where video footage from Korean Central Television showed him wearing a mask for the first time. Radio Free Asia reports the World Health Organization is in touch with the North's Health Ministry officials and is still committed to offering help on acquiring COVID-19 vaccines through the COVAX Global Vaccine Sharing Program, which the regime has so far declined. Meanwhile, Amnesty International has demanded North Korea immediately set up plans to secure vaccines for its vulnerable population in cooperation with the international community. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Staying on the peninsula, there have been additional alarming acts of belligerence from North Korea. On Thursday, the country fired 3 ballistic missiles toward the East Sea. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Pei Eun-ji reports.
At about 6:30 p.m. on Thursday, the South Korean military said North Korea launched a total of 3 short-range ballistic missiles toward the East Sea. Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff said they were fired from the North Sunan area in its capital city of Pyongyang. That's the same area where the North on March 24th conducted its first full ICBM test since 2017. The military said the missiles flew about 360 kilometers at an altitude of around 90 kilometers. The latest launch reportedly involved a multiple rocket launcher, and it's the first time that the North has ever test-fired 3 missiles consecutively. This comes just 3 days after the newly inaugurated President Yoon took office on Tuesday. It also comes after the South Korean military said earlier in the day that it has now decided to use the word missile and officially classify it as a provocation rather than just a threat. This is in line with the new administration's promise that it'll deal sternly with provocations from North Korea.
North Korea's series of missile launches recently are serious provocations that pose a threat to the Korean Peninsula, as well as international peace and security. We strongly urge the North to immediately put a halt to its actions.
In fact, on Thursday, in a text message to reporters right after the launch, the military wrote that the North fired a ballistic missile. Normally, the military would use the word projectile instead. Following the launch, the presidential office convened a meeting of its National Security Council, where they condemned the North's actions. It also said the government will take practical and stern measures against the provocation. Seoul's ambassador to the United Nations also condemned Pyongyang's recent missile tests during a Security Council meeting in New York on Wednesday and urged the North to commit to complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. The phrase, often abbreviated as CVID, marks a shift in tone in South Korea's policy towards North Korea. 배은지, Arirang News.
In related news, the international community has been quick to denounce Pyongyang's latest displays of defiance. Our foreign ministry correspondent Min Suk-hyun has more.
North Korea's 16th weapons test this year is drawing global condemnation. In a phone call on Thursday, the U.S. and South Korea strongly condemned the regime's latest ballistic missile launches. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and his counterpart Kim Song-han reaffirmed the importance of their alliance and agreed to work closely on North Korea. The two also shared their objective of the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula while discussing President Joe Biden's upcoming visit to Seoul. Japan and the European Union also denounced North Korea's recent provocations during a summit in Tokyo. In a joint statement, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and EU leaders called on Pyongyang to cease its destabilizing actions and to resume dialogue with relevant parties. Together, they reiterated that North Korea should not have nuclear weapons and urged the regime to abandon weapons of mass destruction. The EU vowed to take a bigger role in Asia's regional tensions.
The Indo-Pacific is a thriving region. It is also a theater of tensions. Take the situation in the East and South China Sea or the constant threat of the DPRK. As we discussed, Prime Minister Kishida, dear Fumio, the European Union wants to take a more active role in the Indo-Pacific.
Meanwhile, on Thursday, the White House said North Korea could launch a nuclear test as early as this month.
In terms of whether we expect a test, the United States assesses that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea could be ready to conduct a test there as early as this month. This would be its 7th such test. We've shared this information with allies and partners and are closely coordinating with them.
The U.S. is closely monitoring signs of additional provocations from the North, including a 7th nuclear test, as President Joe Biden is set to visit South Korea next week. Min Suk-hyun, Arirang News.
Also, the White House has hinted that President Joe Biden may visit the demilitarized zone next week, that is, during his trip to South Korea. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said Thursday details of Mr. Biden's trip have yet to be finalized, but that a stop at the DMZ has been the norm among many American leaders during their trips to this part of the world. She also claimed that Washington believes Pyongyang may conduct a nuclear test as early as this month, which was reported by our Min Suk-hyun earlier. Now, Mr. Biden will be in Seoul from the 20th of May to the 22nd and will meet with President Yoon. In other news, the United Nations has voted to launch an inquiry into Russia's alleged atrocities against civilians in Ukraine. Separately, Finland and Sweden appear to be paving a path to NATO membership, and Russia has vowed to retaliate. Our Jong-un has the latest.
With an overwhelming majority, the UN Human Rights Council decided to investigate possible Russian war crimes in Ukraine. It passed a resolution on Thursday amid calls by protesters in front of the UN headquarters in Geneva and an accusation by Ukraine of, quote, endless list of crimes.
The areas of Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv regions, which have been under Russian occupation in late February and March, have experienced the most gruesome human rights violations on the European continent in decades.
Russia left its seat empty in protest. China, shifting from its previous stance of abstaining on Ukraine, voted against the decision alongside Eritrea. Moscow denies any civilian abuses in what it calls a special military operation in Ukraine to rid the country of anti-Russian nationalism driven by the West. But the UN is currently investigating what they say may amount to war crimes, citing the bodies of over 1,000 civilians recovered in Kyiv and other regions.
The scale of unlawful killings, including indicia of summary executions in areas to the north of Kyiv, is shocking. While we have information about 300 such killings, the figures will continue to increase as new evidence becomes available.
The investigation team is set to submit its progress in September and a final report by next March. Meanwhile, G7 foreign ministers are in North Germany to discuss global food shortages resulting from the Ukraine war until Saturday. Then, an unofficial NATO meeting will take place in Berlin. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will take part, as well as foreign ministers of Finland and Sweden. The two Nordic countries expressed a wish to join the defense alliance, overturning their long-held neutrality. Russia has warned of retaliation. Jong-un, Arirang News.
And it's time now for a quick check on the local weather forecast. I have Chejian standing by. Jian, welcome.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Right, so Jian, the mercury was quite high yesterday. Are we seeing the same this Friday afternoon?
Right, yesterday it was quite hot, and we're seeing a similar pattern for today, but temperatures are slightly lower today and will tumble tomorrow as a cold air mass rolls into the country. So you might feel it's chillier than it actually is, so keep yourself warm in the evening. Well, skies look gray and dull, and we have some spring rain in the forecast. It has been raining on Jeju, which will continue for a couple of hours more, and inland regions are expected to experience some scattered spring shower around 5 millimeters, but it will taper off tonight. Well, temperature-wise, just like yesterday, warm in the west and much cooler in the east. You might have noticed the difference on the map, with the west getting up to the mid-20s, while it will be below even 20 degrees in the east. Well, that's all for today. Have a great weekend. I'm Chejian, and back to you, Sunny.
Right, and that brings us to the end of part 1 of the Daily Report. We'll be back with part 2 in a few minutes. Stay with us.
Arirang. What matters?
Welcome back. Korea this week celebrates Adoption Day, which was this past Wednesday. That would be May 11th. Now, in light of this occasion, I have two very special guests here in the studio. Director Yoon Mo, who made the documentary, that is, a poignant story about an adoptee and his reunion with his birth mother 40 years later. Director Yoon, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
I also have the real-life protagonist of that documentary, Lane Fostervold, here in the studio. Lane, thank you very much for making the time to be here.
Thank you for having me, Sunny.
Right, Director Yoon, we'll start with you then. Let's begin with a few words then about your documentary, Mother Dearest. How would you summarize the story?
Let me tell you the logline of the movie. Before dying mother, her son appears after 40 years of separation. But he only speaks a foreign language.
Right, I see. So that's the short story then.
Yeah.
Director Yoon, what was the inspiration perhaps behind this documentary then?
I learned about Lane and his mother's story from an article on the US public radio, NPR, on the internet. And then I thought it has a potential to be something if I filmed the story for about 3 years. There were two crucial reasons for this decision. First, I wanted to observe how people who don't understand each other's language manage to live together and how the method of communication changes. Second, there was a very warm vibe between the two people. So it was like a sprout of love, I think. I wanted to see how it grows. So it is about a mother who is about to die and her son, and the language and love between them. I thought if I put these together, it will be a quite good story, I think.
Right. Lane, now, essentially, it is your story that is being shared in this particular documentary. Could you briefly walk us through your journey from Korea to the US and back to Korea again?
Okay, so my story begins when I was about 2 years old. My birth mother was forced to give me up for adoption. And so she dropped me off at Korean Social Services, which is one of the adoption agencies here. And then from there, I was sent to the US. I was adopted by a family in Minnesota. And I grew up there, and my adoptive family was great. They had a lot of love for me. I felt, I could feel the love that they had for me, and they, you know, my life there was good. But as when I was younger, I really didn't think about what reunion would be like, and you know, I just wanted to fit in and be American. And actually, I had some resentment towards Korea for, you know, giving me up. And a lot of adoptees feel this way, that we feel like we've, you know, kind of been, abandoned or discarded. And so, for the longest time, I didn't want anything to do with Korea. And, you know, I had thoughts about my mother, and as I grew older, probably in my 30s is when I started to kind of start to forgive that part of it and then start to become curious. And so in 2012, I had seen there were a lot of reunion or tours to Korea that were sponsored by other companies, and so I decided to do a homeland tour through one of these companies. And when I finally decided to go, you know, I didn't have any expectations. I just wanted to see Korea, and I wanted to see the orphanage that I was at. And you know, because so much time had passed, I didn't think that it would be possible for me to even find my birth mother. You know, the paperwork back then was very little, and you know, a lot of it was, you know, lost in fires and things like that. So I didn't have any expectations. But when I went to the Korean Social Services, they informed me that my birth mother had looked for me twice. So once in 1998 and then in 2001. And so, but they never told me about it.
Why?
So apparently there's a form that I would have had to sign to allow birth family contact. And so because I didn't know about that, I never signed this form. So it took me going to Korea to find this out. So part of me, when I found that information, I thought, wow, maybe I can. And then the other part was like, wow, that was like, 14 years ago. So I'm probably not going to ever find her. So about 2 years after I got back to the U.S., they messaged me saying that they had located my mother. And so I didn't have direct contact with her. I had contact with my sister. And so we decided, in 2016 is when we were going to meet for the first time. I had planned to stay here for about a month. And after, spending just a little bit of time with them, I realized that 1 month was not going to be long enough for me to actually get to know my family. So I had to make this decision where I have to give up my life in the U.S., my job, everything that I've known, and come back here to live, because I didn't know how much time we'd have together, and I just knew that this is something that I had to do. So that is how I ended up coming back to Korea and staying.
Right. And essentially, Lane, what motivated you to take part in this documentary, this particular project? I mean, your story, it's a deeply personal story, and I'm sure that you may have wanted to keep it private.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, I actually didn't think my mom would agree to it, because the podcast, one of my friends does a adapted podcast, and that's how we, that's how Wangmo found us anyway. But she initially had like disagreed and did not want to do it. And so, this is just a 15-minute interview. So when she told me that there's a director that wanted to film us for like 3 years, I was like, there's no way my mom's going to agree to it. But Momo has a way of making my mom do things that I can't believe. So he convinced her to film this documentary, and I did want to show to my fellow adoptees, a lot of the adoptee stories out there are about the search only, and then it ends when they find the family. But there's not a lot of stories about what happens after that, and a length of time of 3 years of getting to know your mother or your family and overcoming all the hurdles that, it takes to communicate and just, get to know each other again.
Right. A 3-year project, Director Yoon. It's amazing. Now, I hear that your documentary goes beyond the simple story of an adoptee and the reunion with his mother to shed light on perhaps the role of love, is it, in overcoming language barriers. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, the movie is about two people who are connected to each other into inseparable ties, basically mother and son. But they are foreigners to each other. Through this special situation, the audience can think about lots of things, something like their own mothers and son and their family, their mother tongue and nationality. But most of all, through this movie, I think warmth is what matters the most. And the warmth is what we often call love, I think. Also, through this movie, we can recognize various aspects of language. The Korean language and English that we learn in school are necessary for systematic learning, like grammar. However, I personally believe that heart is more important than that, I think. So if there is a sincerity and warmth, it can be delivered through our eyes, gestures, and smile. There are several scenes in the movie where there are some misunderstandings between the cast, but ironically, the misunderstandings are not obstacles. When the characters convey their feelings, whether they are kind of humor, funny, at the same time, we can think about the root of language we use.
Right. And Lane, what do you remember most about making this documentary?
The thing that I remember most about this documentary is when we took my Korean mother to meet my American mother in the U.S. I think they both thought about, what it could possibly be like, but they thought, that's probably never going to happen. And so I think there was a lot of profound feelings that came out from both of them, and a lot of healing that took place that they weren't even aware that they even needed. And so just seeing my two mothers interact with each other was just an experience that I'll just never forget. And it was, beyond what I could have even imagined possible. And to feel the love from both of my mothers and to know that they both love me just as much is just an amazing feeling and experience that I just couldn't believe was happening to me.
I'm sure you're blessed with two wonderful mothers. And while Lane has been blessed with two, Director Yoon, there have been a number of shocking stories here on the local front about children being adopted into abusive homes. What do you suppose are some ways of better addressing this really repulsive reality here?
First of all, it will be ideal if the biological parents could raise a child without sending the baby to adopt. To do so, social awareness should be improved and measures for support should be prepared so that the single mothers or poor families don't have serious problems as they raise children. Like this, we can reduce the number of adopted children as much as possible. And then I think the adoption system will have to be more organized. In fact, having children adopted is a matter of society and nation, I think. So the country should take responsibility for the post-adoption issue rather than simply tossing it to private organizations. In my opinion, we need to closely examine the environment of families and continue to follow up management so that we can find the problems quickly, even if abuse occurs, I think.
Right. And Lane, is there a message that you would like to share with adoptees and their families?
Yeah, to my fellow adoptees who are still searching, I know the tasks for looking for your birth family can seem daunting at times, but for me, I think that you just need to come to Korea and look, because when I was looking for my father's side, I only had part of a name and in a restaurant in Changwon, and that's it, nothing else. And this was over 40 years ago. So when we went down there and we spent many days down there just talking to the locals and asking people, I couldn't believe how many people still remember that restaurant from 40 years ago, and how many people just wanted to help us, and they were just so nice to us. And so I feel like a lot of people in these rural areas don't really go far away from, that area. So there are really good chances of you running into somebody who may have even known your family. So I feel like for those people still searching, you need to spend some time here and actually go to the cities that may be in your file. For the families, the Korean families that have given up children, one of the other reasons I agreed to this movie is that I was hoping that some of these Korean families who have relinquished children may reconsider coming forward, or some families don't want to meet their children that they've given away, but I hope this story will show them how good it can be and how healing it can be for both of us. And we are still your children, no matter if you were married at the time or single. We are still part of your family. And I have a half-sister that I love dearly. And I just couldn't imagine, not meeting all of my relatives and on both sides of my family. So if anything comes out of this movie, if one Korean family decides, you know what, I am going to come forward and try to find my child, that will make me more than happy. That will be a success for me.
Right, it would. And Director Yoon, before we end today, could you tell us a bit about your future plans, very briefly speaking?
So I want to make the language matter of film. So I wanted to film the artistic way of communication. So that's my next project.
Right, okay then, Director. Good luck with that. And Lane, thank you so much for being with us as well.
Sunny. Thank you for having me.
Call College campuses here are noting the welcome return of in-person festivals in line with efforts to embrace a new normal amid COVID-19, and the response has been tremendous. My colleague Kim Bo-kyung was there.
The unrelenting pandemic had taken the highly anticipated campus life away from new university students. But now, with social distancing measures lifted, college festivals have returned. Major universities in South Korea are already busy planning their festival schedules, and among them is Seoul National University, which came up with the Homecoming Festival.
The once quiet campus field is now filled with students enjoying the festival that is back in full and in person for the first time in 3 years. A variety of booths, food trucks, and activities add to the festive atmosphere.
One of the organizers says the festival wanted to welcome those who felt the effects of the pandemic the most, the classes of 2020 and 2021, as if they're coming back home.
I believe a good festival helps students connect, makes them talk about the festival they enjoyed even years later. The main purpose is to let them bond and make new memories together.
The festival seemed to do what it set out to, letting students really feel like they're on a university campus, making new friends.
I got in last year but could hardly come to campus because of COVID-19. It's hard to imagine that we are actually having a festival here. Now I feel like a real college student.
Yeah, I think it's our first time, and I think it's super fun. The weather is super nice today, and it's very nice to be outside, not have to wear a mask anymore, and just enjoy the vibes, yeah.
People who were in the year above me at high school told me that going to college wouldn't be anything special, so I was worried about being disappointed. But now we're having festivals and can meet many new friends. I feel so happy.
University festivals being back and at full capacity has been welcomed by the vendors too.
We went through such a tough period due to the virus, so having festivals like this gives us a lot of hope.
Other major universities are also working out their festival plans to give students a place they can meet new people in person instead of on Zoom. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Tours of Cheongwade will be held until June 11th. After opening the former presidential compound to the public this past Tuesday, the new top office announced that the tours, which were originally scheduled to end on May 22nd, will be extended. Reservations for the extended period began via online platforms including Naver, Kakao and Toss. The Korean version of the website shows visitors must book at least 9 days ahead of their desired tour date. The Blue House will be open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., accepting up to 39,000 guests per day. As of early Friday, there were well over 2 million applicants. Art Busan, one of South Korea's biggest art fairs, opened doors back on Thursday at the city's Bexco Exhibition Center. Now, 133 galleries from 21 countries, including the Kukje Gallery, Gallery Hyundai and Gray, are taking part. Works by Pablo Picasso, David Hockney and others are on display. The exhibition also includes talks exploring the latest art trends, such as NFTs. Online viewing is available for those unable to attend the fair, which runs through Sunday. Seoul will expand support networks for multicultural families within this year. As part of these efforts, more interpreters will be hired to help expecting mothers at hospitals, and more childcare services will be set up. Now, currently, the city has 25 interpreters and will employ 10 more. Also, 5 more multicultural family centers that offer childcare will be built, as presently there is only one such center. Meanwhile, lectures and consultations will be available to those seeking jobs.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. More news of wildfires in the United States as new reports are shedding light on one in California. Since Wednesday, a fire that's been pushed by strong winds into the city of Laguna Niguel has destroyed at least 20 homes and scorched around 80 hectares. Hundreds of residents have evacuated danger areas, while firefighters spent the night fighting the blaze, going house by house. According to Orange County authorities, the fire has not been contained yet, with local emergency orders still in place. The cause of the blaze is under investigation. Dubbed the coastal wildfire, the blaze is relatively small compared to other major wildfires that can break out in western states. A series of wildfires have plagued the US in recent months. Global shares sank to their lowest point in 18 months on Thursday following inflation, rising interest rates and energy supply fears in Europe. This follows a warning from Germany that Russia is using energy supplies as a, quote, weapon to put pressure on Europe's Stock 600 index. The global index is now almost 20% lower for the year to date. In the US, all three major stock indexes fluctuated before going into a steep sell-off, putting the S&P 500 within a closing level that may confirm a bear market entry. Brent crude futures settled 6 cents lower at $107.45 a barrel, while US crude oil futures ended 42 cents higher at $106.13 a barrel. The World Cup trophy started its global tour on Thursday, starting with a star-studded unveiling in Dubai. Marking its fifth global tour, the iconic gold trophy will be sent to 53 countries, including for the first time all 32 countries that qualified for the 2022 World Cup. Former Brazilian midfielder Kaká and former World Cup winning Spanish goalkeeper Iker Casillas joined the ceremony in Dubai. The tour allows fans to see the trophy up close and take pictures. Dating back to 1974, the World Cup trophy is made of solid gold, and it can only be physically held by certain people, including former winners and heads of state. The 31st Southeast Asian Games have opened in the Vietnamese city of Hanoi after being delayed for a year due to the pandemic. Following a nationwide easing of antivirus restrictions, many spectators and athletes were seen without face masks during the 2-hour opening ceremony. Vietnam's president was among the thousands of people enjoying the event. Hosted in Hanoi and 11 surrounding cities until May 23rd, the 18-day biennial games will see 5,000 athletes from 11 participating nations compete across 40 sports. Scientists on Thursday unveiled the first image of a supermassive black hole at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. Called Sagittarius A star, it was photographed by the Event Horizon Telescope, marking only the second time such a phenomenon has been captured in an image. The central dark region in the picture is where the hole resides, surrounded by light coming from superheated gas, accelerated by gravitational forces. Sagittarius A star is located about 26,000 light-years away from Earth, or 9.5 trillion kilometers. It also has 4 million times the mass of our Sun. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Friday afternoon. Yesterday was quite hot, but highs are slightly lower today and will plunge tomorrow as a cold air mass moves into the country. So it might feel chilly as it's rather breezy today. So keep yourself warm in the evening. We have lots of clouds overhead, and that will lead to some spring rain. It has been raining on Jeju, and it will continue for a couple of more hours. Inland regions are seeing scattered rain around 5 millimeters, but it's going to subside later at night. Well, temperature-wise, we're seeing a similar pattern to yesterday. Warm in the west and much cooler in the east. And you can easily notice the distinct contrast on the map. Mid-20s in the west and even below 20 degrees in the east. We're about to wrap up our weekend with clear skies, normal spring temperatures, and no dust. So go out and enjoy the glorious spring weather in Korea. Have a great weekend. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
On that note, we end this week's editions of the Daily Report. Have a safe weekend and do join us again on Monday.